Hello, this is John from caveofprogramming.com. In this tutorial we're going to look at multi-dimensional arrays in C++. We're going to take a look at two-dimensional arrays specifically. So sometimes you haven't got a list of values, you've got a table of values, and to deal with that you need a two-dimensional array. Let's take an example. We'll create a two-dimensional array of strings. So I'm going to type the type here. Let's give this a name. I'll call it animals, and I'm going to put square brackets here on the end, and I'm going to have in fact two sets of square brackets, and I'm going to create a table of animals. So we're going to have, let's make it, I don't know, 3 by 2 or something like that. So I'll have two rows here. So the first for the first size here I'm going to put 2, and then I'm going to have each of those two rows is going to have 3 columns in it. So I'm going to put 3 here for the second index, and let's initialize that and see how it looks. So again, as with one-dimensional arrays, which we saw in the last tutorial, you don't have to initialize the values when you declare the array. Here we're declaring it. We don't have to initialize it here. We could just put a semicolon and set the values later. But here, let's actually initialize it to see what that looks like. So I'm going to say equals, and we're going to have curly parentheses as we did for a one-dimensional array. But now the deal with this is that each of the elements in the array is itself an array. So with a two-dimensional array, we're going to have, it's going to look like a table. So we're going to have 2 more curly brackets in here, and then a comma, and then following that another pair of curly brackets, and no comma after the second one, because that's the last one. So here we've got 2 rows as we specified here, and we're going to have 3 columns in each of those 2 rows. So let's say here fox, dog, cat, and in the second row let's have mouse, squirrel, parrot. So this is a table, and we can display the contents of this table using a nested for loop. This is one of those things that when you're beginning C++ and you've got to a certain point, this is kind of like a thing that seems quite challenging, but it's really useful. And two-dimensional arrays, for example, are extremely important if you do any work with graphics, but they're important in a lot of different contexts as well. Wherever you need a table, you're probably going to use a two-dimensional array, or else a vector, which is something that we'll look at later in the course, or possibly even in the next course, which is going to be on advanced C++. So let's create a for loop that can iterate over the inner loop here, over the outer array, I should say. So this thing here is the outer array. It's an array with 2 elements, and this is the first element, and that's the second element. So let's iterate over that, just as we did in the last tutorial. Let's say for int I equals 0. Keep going while I is less than 2, because we've got 2 rows in the outer array. So that's going to be, we're going to look at the indices 0 and 1. This is at index 0, and this is at index 1, and I++ to increase I by 1. And now we're going to have a loop within this loop, and we're going to pay scrupulous attention to indenting stuff with extra tabs whenever we put stuff within curly parentheses. So let's say in here 4, and we can't use I again because we've already used it, so let's use j. Int j equals 0, and this is a common thing to do, use I, j or k for loop counters like this, while j is less than 3, because now we're going to iterate over the inner arrays. J is less than 3, and j++. And now we can output in here the elements of the array. So we're going to be taking it row by row. So for the first row here, let's output cout and animals, and now we need two indices to specify the position of the element within the array. First one is I. This specifies the position within the outer array. So this gets us this array, or when the index is 1 it will get us this array. And then we need a second index to get the element in a particular column within these inner arrays. So here we're going to put j. And now I'm going to output flush there. And let's have a space after that as well to separate the individual elements, like that. And I'm going to put the new line after this inner for loop, but within the outer for loop. Let's just have a new line, cout endler, because that will mean that every time we iterate through one of these arrays, then we're going to put a new line after it, so that we get this sort of, it kind of looks like a table. Let's save that and let's run it. So what we get is this. That's our table. So this looks a little bit complicated, and again some practice is needed before you can really fully understand it and be comfortable with it. One thing we can do here is we can miss out this, the first index. We can't miss out the second index, because C++ kind of sees this as just a bunch of values one after the other, like 6 values in this case, and we need to clue in C++ as to how the array is organized. So we're saying here that the inner arrays have 3 elements each. We also can't have inner arrays with different numbers of elements in. They've got to have the same numbers of elements in C++. And a really common mistake that beginners often make is they confuse these indices. So if you end up having like I there, or you put I there by accident or something like that, then this isn't going to work. So you need to have I's there, J's there, and then you need to say I, J, and you need to be very, very careful that this is the number of elements in the outer array. So that's 1 and 2, and this, the J value, goes up to the number of elements in the inner arrays, 1, 2, 3 in both cases. And so this j is going to go 0, 1 and 2. It's not ever going to be equal to 3, because that will be off the end of the array, and I is going to be 0 and 1. So that's basically it for this tutorial. This is called a two-dimensional array because we've got 2 dimensions. Each of the subscripts we think of as a dimension, and we can go kind of across the array. That's 1 dimension, or we can go down it. That's the 2nd dimension. Or you could say they're the other way around. You know, down is the first and across is the second, or whatever. But that's why it's called a 2-dimensional array. And you can have 3-dimensional arrays and so on. You can add more brackets here, but then you're going to end up building some, hyperdimensional structure that could take up a lot of memory. And it's two-dimensional arrays are by far the most common form of multi-dimensional array, with 3 being less common. I've never seen anyone use 4 or 5, but you could if you want to. So to practice this, what I'd suggest is that you create a 2-dimensional array of integers and try to print out a multiplication table for the numbers 1 to 10, and for each number put the value in there that's equal to its multiplication table up to 10. So your first row in the array is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and so on up to 10. The second row is going to be 2, 4, 6, and so on up to the final row, which is going to be 10, 20, 30, 40. Try to print out a full multiplication table, 10 by 10, and see where you get. So you're going to have to use a nested for loop like this to initialize it. And you probably, if you start at 1 instead of 0, instead of having 0 times 0 in the upper left corner here, you're going to have 1 by 1, so you're going to have to carefully think about your loop indices, or better still, maybe just add 1 where necessary within the actual brackets here where you need it. And then use a second nested for loop to display the full multiplication table. So see if you can do that. You're going to end up with a table that's like 1, 2, 3, dot 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 up to 10, and then it's going to be 2, 4, 6, dot dot dot, and then 3, 6, 9, all the way up to 10 times 3, which is 30, and so on. So have a go at that. It's a little bit of a challenge for you. And until next time, happy coding.